Hey everyone, welcome to Coffee with Changemakers. I'm Robin.
And I'm Yoshi. On the Coffee with Changemakers podcast, we explore the stories of changemakers taking on some of today's biggest social and environmental challenges.
Every episode, we host an intimate conversation on social impact and leadership, where we listen, learn, and connect over a cup of coffee with inspiring guests from all over the world.
So before we jump into today's episode, we have a quick ask. If you enjoy our conversations, it would mean the world to us if you subscribe, rate, and perhaps even tell a friend about the show. Your support helps us bring even more inspiring guests onto future episodes.
So, here's today's coffee chat. Enjoy.
And today, we are super excited to be speaking with Ralph Nicolai Nasara. He's a PhD holder and also a fellow One Young World ambassador and winner of the LEAD 2030 Challenge. And also he's the co-founder and CTO of OOYOO. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Is it OOYOO?
Very correct. OOYOO. We'll get into that later.
Okay. Yeah. OOYOO. All right. A social impact startup which uses cutting-edge materials and technology that enhances air and gas purification for a cleaner and more mobile world. So all climate scenarios that prevent the overshoot of 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming involve carbon capture technologies. And although crucial to support climate goals, the carbon capture utilization and storage, or the CCUS market, is relatively small and not widely implemented since the costs are way too high right now. So in 2021, only 40 million tons of CO2 were captured for storage underground. The oil and gas industry utilized some 70 to 80 million tons for enhanced oil recovery. And OOYOO is developing low-cost, high-performance filters that can selectively capture CO2 from a mixture of gases from emission sources with a low CO2 concentration, such as power stations or cement factories. And OOYOO then produces high concentrations of CO2 with increased cost savings. So with larger cost savings for carbon capture, the faster the implementation of CCUS technologies globally. So this is expected to support a carbon recycling economy, reduce dependency on key resources, and also create additional value across the carbon recycling value chain, and reduce associated emissions, and finally, ultimately make cities greener again. But Ralph can definitely do a much better job explaining all of this than I can, so I'm super excited to dive straight into this and welcome our guest. So Ralph, how's it going? How are you doing today?
All right. I'm feeling excited, and thank you again for Yoshi and Robin for the invitation.
Of course, man. Of course. So maybe you can just, start us off with a little bit of your personal story, where you're from, where you were raised, how you got into all of this. We'd love to hear that origin story, man.
So my name is Ralph. I'm born and raised in the Philippines. And I remember my first endeavor in energy when I was around 5 years old. Wow. So back in the Philippines, we would have this very old televisions, which were based on remote controls, right? Yep. And often I was tasked to, for example, if the remote was not clicking, my mom or dad or anyone at that time would ask me to take out the batteries and do like this.
Yeah, I remember
so
that.
Like rub it, rub it in between my palm for a few seconds, and then you're starting to feel some heat in your palm. And when you feel that, you put the batteries back on, and it suddenly worked. And then I always had the notion, like even when I was a kid, of course, without the knowledge of physics at that time, that wow, hands can create batteries or hands can create energy. And then in extreme cases where the hand magic didn't work, my mom and dad told me that, all right, take out the batteries, sun dry the batteries for a few hours, and then its operation time would be much, much longer. So even from a longer age, I was always curious about energy, about how things powered lives. So I was born in the southern islands of the Philippines called Mindanao. And Yep, beautiful place. But admittedly, let's say the electrification ratio in the Philippines is not that high. So back then, Mindanao really wasn't a state which had well-connected grids for electricity. And my dad always told me that for you to improve your conditions or basically make a change in your life, it starts with education. So my dad and mom, they had somewhat of a Romeo and Juliet story. So my mom and dad basically had me when they were 19 and 20.
Wow.
But even at that stage, they made it into a priority that they stayed true for me, that, all right, to give you the best chance for you to change your own life, you need to have the best education you can. So I studied very hard and then went to the best university in the Philippines, UP.
Wow.
UP Diliman. And then when I had a chance to enroll to university, so this is when I started disappointing my dad, because because until that age, like, I was a straight A student. Dad, what should I do? You should study mathematics. Okay, I'm going to study it. Dad, what sport should I do? All right, do basketball. Okay, Dad.
Wow.
So I asked my dad to go into the University of the Philippines. He needed to input what kind of degree he wanted to go into.
Okay.
So my dad was working for the semiconductor industry at that time, way before the boom, but he already had the foresight that semiconductor is going to go up. So if you study semiconductor, at least I would have done my job as a parent to make sure that you're not hungry. And if you're not hungry, you can think about what you want to do.
Right.
Wow. So I took material science, which is basically, again, becomes, let's say, a parent subject for materials, chemistry, and semiconductor. But when it was time for me to choose my master's, let's say my bachelor's thesis, so my dad was so happy, all right, you're already in your penultimate year, please just keep in track. So I was asking my dad, what kind of topic should I have? So he was telling me, oh, these are the advancements in semiconductors, about in this materials. It's like, But then the topic that I ended up choosing is batteries, going back to my favorite story when I was 5 years old, because I was always curious, and now I know more, right? Now I know concepts about energy and thermodynamics. So I always fell in love about energy and batteries starting when I was 5. And my dad was kind of disappointed. Like, I was like, from his point of view, I was hurting you for the semiconductor path, but I chose batteries because I just love the thing, right? The concept of powering your hands. And then I pursued battery research as early as 18 years old to try to formalize my curiosity about energy. And then I went on to pursue masters, but then in Taiwan. Why in Taiwan? Because my dad, again, gave me another advice that I broke, right? So Taiwan is known for their semiconductor industry, and I received an offer to pursue master's study. And my dad said that, take that, because you can go to TSMC. But I disappointed him one more time. I enrolled in a master's program, but proceeded to do more battery research. And then the chain of disappointment continued as I proceeded with my PhD, still with battery research. And then at that time, on 2020 was the Nobel Prize for battery being fully awarded. And that, like, I want to complete my story, right? So like, all right, I need to go to the Holy Land. It was in Japan when the first lithium-ion battery was invented by Sony, 1991. And I was born in 1991. So like, I couldn't write a better chapter, right? Like I want to go to the Holy Land where the thing that drove me crazy since I was 5, like, I'm going to find the answers. I'm going to find the Holy Grail. So I went to Kyoto University for a postdoctoral research for 1.5 years. And then I was working with cutting edge batteries for solid state applications for EVs for Sumitomo Chemical Company. And that's when I thought that, and this is quite relevant to the story about change, right? Change makers. So I came across a path where, all right, I now am accumulating a lot of knowledge about batteries. This is something I wanted when I was a kid. And there's a path for me to move deeper into the academic position. do more postdocs, do more academic training, do more scientific papers, do more patents. But then life changed just 2 years ago, where I met this individual, Professor Sivanaya, Isan Sivanaya, because he was a professor at that time and he was a foreigner. So he looked like a very good example for me to get the advice that I needed to pursue that path. So I met with him, we had a few drinks, and he was asking me, Ralph, why do you want to be in the academe, or why do you want to carve your way as a professor? And then he basically told me to stop. So imagine, since you were 5, you thought you already had your life planned out, working on a topic you thought you were genuinely invested on, following a path that you think another person could give you an advice, but the best advice that he could give me is, Ralph, you could make your own change. And we were drinking at that time, and it was like, oh, what changed? What should I do now? Because there's some kind of identity disclosure, right? Like, I've been doing this for, at that point, I was 30 years old. If I switch to another path, who am I now, or what should I do now? And then he opened the path that, Ralph, it's not your knowledge that you carry now, it's the knowledge that you will carry in the future, but you have demonstrated certain skills that allow you to carve your own path. So why don't you start this company with me? And that was, let's say, I was brought into the OOYOO network by Professor Sivanaya.
Wow. Thanks for that comprehensive background, man. That was truly inspiring. Wow. I mean,
what a compelling story.
Yeah.
And like, between you and your dad, so semiconductors, right? Incredible foresight there, and batteries, which is like the future of our entire economy in some ways. It's just incredible foresight on behalf of your family.
Yeah. Quick question. Now, what does your dad think about all of this now? Because, he was such a big, influence in your life. Like, is he happy? Is he okay with everything, or?
Yeah, there's another side story where I created another tangent for disappointment. So after I finished my PhD and I moved to, let's say, a sort of a industrial postdoctoral, all right, so Kyoto University, Sumitomo Chemical. So I think my dad thought, all right, so he's increasing his professional chances by at least being involved in an industrial project. And then at that split of the road, I actually got offered to work for Dyson. So I was headhunted to work for Dyson in Singapore for their battery project. And my dad thought that, okay, all right, my son, I was wrong. It was okay for you to choose your own path and carve your own path. You finally made it. You're now going to work in Dyson, which is a well-known company, and then cutting edge research. And then at that split, it was like, you know what? I'm going to forget everything about battery, and I'm going to work on this new topic that I have no idea about. And then my dad's like, okay, you are who you are.
That's funny, man. But I'm sure your dad is proud of you, man, for everything that you've done to this point, and also what you are about to do, and the impact that you are about to make. I mean, impact that you've already made, I should say. But okay, well, let's sort of dive deeper into the projects and the impact, man. So Robin, go ahead, please take the lead.
Right. So in terms of the beginning, the origin story of OOYOO, you mentioned this serendipitous drink, or like this meeting with Professor, is it Sivanaya? And
Sivanaya,
he was like, hey, I really want to bring you on board. Let's do this. Was that roughly in 2020? Is that right? What was the kind of process to launching OOYOO? I'm very curious to hear.
So Professor Sivanaya, again, by himself, he already had this concept of OOYOO. Starting from his experiences in Cambridge as a group leader, and again, cutting material science work that always involved very big impact. So Professor Sivanaya did a lot of work for water filtration, very, very cutting edge material science, with the outlook that it should always go back to society. It's always application based. So he started OOYOO on April 2020. But at that time, it was also the peak of COVID.
Oh, it just started, right? I guess in Japan, it was around March, April was really the time it kicked off.
Yes. So he already incorporated the company, had its initial members at that time. But again, it's COVID, right? As much as they would have loved to proceed with the development and just get the company started, the company was basically sleeping for 2 years or so. And it's around the early months of 2022, so around 2 years after, did I have a chance to first intern with Professor Sibanaya. So there's a quite overlap. So I was working for Sumitomo Chemical and Kyoto University for 1.5 years. But what I would do is, so I would do my normal shift from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., I would do the OOYOO internship unpaid for I think a year.
Wow. That's dedication to the cause, Ralph. That's respect. I don't know how you managed to do that.
And then that's when, so even before Professor Sivanaya asked me to officially be, let's say, a co-founder of the company or an employee of the company, there was already a lot of, like, I recognize something in this guy. He's put in the work. He shares the mission and the vision. Like, I want to have him on that culture that I'm building for OOYOO.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Wow.
I think during my research, I saw that the technology, the core technology behind OOYOO had been developed for years and years and years, and then kind of it came out into the market, if that's correct. And if that is correct, what I find really interesting about that, and with a lot of startups and disruptive technologies from universities, it does take a long time of R&D, trial and error to get the technology right, and then an entirely new journey to get that technology to the market. But is that right? Did it take a long time in terms of research to get to that core technology?
Yes, I think that's correct. So usually and I've only known about this once I've officially joined the company and started developing its technology, is there's this concept called technology readiness level. So when you have an idea, it's basically an idea. So it's a technology readiness level 0, right? Where you get to a tiny proof of concept that you've demonstrated the science, then it's basically technology readiness level of 1. And so this is where people think that, wow, I've gotten a paper, I've demonstrated the science at the tiniest scale. But to get to commercialization, you need to get to technology readiness level 9. So from technology readiness level 1, you need to answer multiple key questions, right? Could you increase the scale? If you do your experiments in a different environment, do the concepts still apply? Are you able to lower the price? So most of the innovators actually are on the ideation side, let's say from a technology readiness level 1 to 4. And this is, I think that for most inventors, this is where the kid zone is, because this is where you get to start new ideas and you get to test them. But taking something from technology readiness level 4 and systematically de-risking it to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way until its deployment and commercialization takes a lot of time and resource. So that's true.
That's really interesting. And from what I understand, one of your core competencies or core areas of focus is carbon capture and utilization and storage. But the current issue that I'm hearing about is really to do with the cost, right? It's incredibly expensive to do things like direct air capture and these kinds of technologies. But I'd be curious to know more about what are OOYOO's core technologies and what's your main focus right now? And how does that lead to impact as well? I'd be very curious.
Yeah, so maybe for our listeners, so let's explain why carbon capture first is needed and why is there an automatically associated tag that it's difficult. So for example, every time we use fossil fuels for energy, so basically we burn, so basically it's in carbon form, right? And we basically burn it and then it reacts with oxygen. So basically the carbon reacts with oxygen, releases a lot of energy, and then ends up being CO2. So in that process, CO2 is actually a low energy state. So for us to take the CO2 back to its high energy state, then it's almost like we need to reverse the wheel. So that's where the energy discussion comes. And one of the challenges of capturing CO2 is when we burn something, it's a mixture of other gases. So think about it as if you open a bag of Skittles, right? You have the red, you have the blue, you have the greens. And your task is just to get one specific color, but they're all the same size. So there are multiple ways to get it. One is to hand pick all the red ones. So some of the methods that are used for carbon capture involve a lot of temperature. So for example, going back to the Skittles story, most of them are the same size, referring to the gases in the mixture. But some gases have some affinity. So think about it as if you have a sticky finger, right? You put your sticky finger or palm in the Skittle puddle, and only the carbon dioxide sticks to your hand. So you've effectively captured the carbon dioxide. But the problem is now you have all of the carbon dioxide molecules stuck to your hand. Like, how do you release it? So people use two methods. One is they heat their hand. So that means that, all right, it's back to its sticky state and the carbon dioxide has been separated. Or they apply some pressure. So there's always energy related, because to generate pressure and energy, you always need energy. Pressure and heat, you always need energy. But what the OOYOO technology is doing is a passive process. So instead of manually picking the carbon dioxide, we just make filters. So it's like a sieve, right? And only the Skittles, the red Skittles, which we targeted to be CO2, they're the ones passing through the filter. So think about it as a coffee filter. So it's a very passive separation. You don't need high temperatures, and you also don't need a lot of chemicals to facilitate the separation. So that's why it's deemed to be lower energy as compared to the other conventional carbon capture methods.
Incredible. I love the way you've just broken something that's really complicated down into really simple language. It's good. I'm sure this could be an extremely technical conversation, but just and seeing from your research, the research that I did as well, you're really, really gifted at sharing this technical knowledge in a way that's easy to break down. So I just want to say thank you for that. And I'd love to hear a bit more about. So you mentioned it's a passive technology. So I believe it's a kind of membrane that you've.
That's
developed.
correct. Yep.
Who uses this membrane, and how is it used to absorb the carbon? I'd be curious. Carbon dioxide.
Yeah. So basically, membranes are most generally known as filters, right? Yeah. So filters. All right. So if we're talking about coffee with change makers, I think, or there could have been different methods in how you prepared your coffee. Probably you used a coffee filter. So you had your ground beans, but your ground beans was mixed with water or another component, right? You mixed it, but you don't want your ground beans on your coffee cup. You only want one component. And for your coffee filtration to happen, you actually just let it drip. So that's the definition of passive filtration. And what the OOYOO membrane has done very well is, again, because the carbon capture, so one of the challenges with carbon capture has always been the cost. So as compared to other technologies, the energy needed for membrane-based technologies is much lower, but we wanted to double down. We wanted to make sure that the materials that we're using to capture is also low. So the innovation is in the cheap materials. Therefore, we are able to facilitate lower operation cost and also lower material cost.
Incredible. And in terms of the current users of the technology, is it being deployed across different companies in Japan, or who's currently using the technology?
So now OOYOO is working with the Japanese government called the NEDO Green Innovation Fund project, in which we were awarded with our partner Sumitomo Chemical Company for Goju Okuen for a 9-year project until.
That's a big chunk of money.
It's a big chunk of money. I would love to say $50 million, but the foreign exchange.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So I'm gonna stick with Goju Oku. So it's basically a 9-year project. But first, let me give kudos to the Japanese government, because as we've been discussing until this point, there are other methods to capture carbon dioxide. But what the Japanese government did is, we're not gonna be preferential. Oh, we love membranes, let's just invest in membranes. No, they took all the candidates that are feasible and invested the same amount of money, then off you go.
Oh.
So that means we're in a flat foot race with other competing technologies, such as amine-based or other new technologies such as electroswing. But the cool part is, so the Japanese government chose 6 projects for carbon capture. And then maybe if there's a postscript, you can see companies like JERA, IHI, Denso. So all of these are big companies. And then in that list of participants, there's only one startup called OOYOO.
That's the beginning of another great story, though, right? The David versus Goliath.
Yep.
I'm sure in a way everyone's working towards the same goal, and there is a peer relationship, I'm sure. But I love the beginning of that story as well. And actually, that segues nicely to my next question, which is about challenges, right? This is a huge undertaking. Your mission is admirable, but it's huge in scale and it has potential huge impact. It's already having a large impact as well. What were some of the key challenges that you're facing as you roll this technology out to different companies?
So maybe first, let me answer your previous question about who's using the product or who are the potential customers. So the projects of the Japanese government, at least from our side, is to be able to provide carbon capture for the small and medium scale emitters. Because if you think about carbon capture, so you could look at it on 2 lenses. One is on the lens that I'm Toyota and I want to decarbonize my supply chain. Then first, I have the financial balance sheet to implement renewable energy and other decarbonization methods. So they're probably going to hit their targets because it's also in alignment with their shareholders. But if you look at it on the other side, where most of the emissions are made through various scope 3 emissions. So you look at, let's say, for the example of an automobile maker, let's say a car has multiple parts, the handles, the frame, the screws, the brakes, and these are all made by tier 2 or tier 3 companies who are who are smaller in scale compared to Toyota. But they will be expected by their automobile customers. So that Mr. Screw Producer, I want to decarbonize my manufacturing. So can you give me the same screw with the same quality, but with a lower carbon footprint? And they're going to say that, but there isn't a technology that is first adaptable to my scale, which is small, medium scale. And the technologies that are available are so expensive. So this is one of the core tenets in why we believe membrane technology, especially the low cost one, is adaptable first to the small and medium scale consumers, with the outlook that once we develop the technology well enough and we have the partners, then we're also able to offer solutions to cement. So that's why we have also worked with Holcim through One Young World and the LEAD 2030 program, because again, that's another story where there are ways to decarbonize cement, but the way we're making it just produces a lot of CO2. And cement being a commodity product, you don't actually have a lot of room to apply decarbonization. You just need to capture it from its point of release.
That's so interesting. So the current strategy is to really work with these SME emitters and then potentially scale up or work with also players in the cement market. Is that
yep, cement markets, steel. So the well-known term for this is the hard-to-abate sectors. So for example, automobile or maritime shipping. Because if you think about power generation, you can transition to renewable or nuclear. So there are other methods to decarbonize the way we generate power. But for things like cement, steel, maritime shipping, let's say, transport, it's going to take a longer time. So for us to transition to the energy pathways that we have committed, the 1.5 degrees by 2050, then carbon capture will play a definitive role in some of these hard to abate applications.
Amazing. And in terms of your journey so far, you've been doing this for several years, and I'd be very curious to know about what were some of the challenges you've experienced rolling this out.
So, because carbon capture, even though it's being talked a lot, I personally think remains to be, there's a lot of political influence to it. So if you think about it, the same 1 ton that you produce in Japan is priced, the same 1 ton will be priced differently if it was produced in Indonesia, as if it was produced in Europe, and then the same 1 ton is produced in the United States. So how could that be? So that means that the same physical 1 ton is being taxed differently. And you think about it from a, let's say, consumer point of view, your incentive or your penalty systems are different. So, for example, in Europe, one of the most advanced markets for carbon credit and taxing, they have billions of tons of permits that they're handing out, and companies are complying, and they're finding and needing innovation, because 1 ton of carbon dioxide in Europe is 68 euros, if I'm not mistaken. Where 1 ton of CO2 in Japan through the J credit is probably 3,000 yen. So you can see that for me to remove the same 1 ton, I would require the same technology. But here in Japan, I would have just been probably better off if I would have released it, as compared to investing in all the capex. Where in Europe, there's no getting around it. You need to pay the 68 euros if you cannot meet your quotas. So I think its policy is one. And I think that, of course, without a driving force, then the market is, I think, slower to adopt. So although there are a lot of startups in this carbon capture space, Robin, you mentioned direct air capture, carbon capture startups, carbon capture and utilization startups, carbon capture and storage startups. But you can see that most of their activity has been related to grants and subsidies. So this is quite a different business model, right? It's not your consumer business model. It's the government trying to activate the technologies in the ecosystem. So I think that always has been a challenge. The adoption of the technology is not there yet, because how does the technology provider get incentivized, and how do all the players in the value chain until the consumer gets incentivized is not yet very clear.
Right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you mentioned 68 euros for a ton of carbon in Europe. In Japan, you mentioned 3,000 yen, which is roughly, with this current exchange rate, it's about $2 or $2.10 or so. So there's a huge gap in this value of carbon. And so that means that policymakers, the carbon markets, have to catch up. They have to increase the price of the carbon, or otherwise it's really hard to deploy at scale. Is that, am I hearing you correctly?
Yes. And I think ultimately Europe is probably recognizing that they're the trailblazers in terms of catalyzing a more unified price. So what Europe has been starting to do is some kind of an import, let's say a carbon credit import adjustment or a cross-border adjustment. So for example, even if you made your car in Indonesia, where there's low tax, every time you bring it to Europe, you're gonna pay the equivalent tax as if this was made in Europe.
Interesting.
So that's becoming. I mean, that has been put into play fairly recently, but that changes a lot of things. So even if it was made in Japan, then more and more companies are also looking, especially if they're doing a lot of business in Europe, they need to address the capture from their port rather than being asked to pay it and give the financial incentive to the European authorities.
How fascinating. Switching over a bit from your challenges, which you've covered some key challenges you've faced. I imagine that through your journey, you've also had a lot of rewarding moments, right? You're already working with major companies in Japan. I saw you signed an MOU with Toppan, which is a huge company again in Japan. What have been some key accomplishments or highlights for you personally on this journey?
So key highlights. So of course, let's say on the company side, of course, we've received this project from the Japanese government, which just gives credibility to what we're doing. It's the recognition that innovators who are doing the hard things are being recognized, regardless if they're a startup or a big corporation. So I think that is the most rewarding thing, because again, and maybe we could talk about this because maybe you guys also have experiences, let's say being founders or being around founders. Building physical stuff is no easy feat when you're moving an atom and an atom. Of course, there's a lot of things known about physics, but it just takes a lot of time, and it just takes a lot of money and learning. But I think the fact that we have grown the company to 20 people and have this partner is what makes me proud, because we've started with a very small boat with very strong convictions only from the founders, but we are able to convince and align much more than ourselves. I think is the best, pat to my back that I could give to myself. that I've convinced other people to join this crazy mission with me.
I love it. I love it. And that's one of the key challenges, right? To get people on board, to get people to believe in your mission and to have buy-in and so on. So, I'm very much for celebrating these wins. It's important, right? If it's a long journey ahead. So I'd be curious, as you face these challenges, as you have these successes, what gets you up in the morning? Because it must be hard, right? This is hard, changing society, doing what you're doing. I'd be curious, what keeps you moving forward in times of hardship?
So the reason the company name is OOYOO, it's basically a blank slate, right? If you look at companies involved in carbon capture, you would see a lot of the word carbon and capture in different mixtures. That means that although they are super sharp in their identity, they have aligned themselves to what they want to do from the company incorporation all the way until their IPO or success matrix. But if you think about OOYOO, is OOYOO a carbon capture company? I don't think so. It doesn't say in the name. Is OOYOO an art museum? I don't know. It doesn't say. It doesn't say in the name. What does OOYOO actually mean? And I've learned this philosophy from Isan, Professor Sibanaya. He created the word OOYOO, and he wanted to create a word in which that through the activities of the members, they can do what they want. So it sounds very dramatic, right? And then we started we started sharing this to more people. Until I explained the company to my Korean friend, and he told me that OOYOO is it's actually milk in Korean. Like all of the dramatic. OOYOO doesn't mean anything, so we can be anything. It's like no, it means milk in Korean. It's like. No, so what gets so again with that backdrop, let's say of the company name and principle, so that means that I'm getting up every day, so I can set up the company and support its mission that whatever OOYOO does, and again through this collection of people, carbon capture is just one technology that we're incubating. We already have a few technologies that are in our pipeline, and basically, who knows? Maybe OOYOO in the future will be a cryptocurrency company. Maybe it's going to be an AI company. But I'm waking up every day to make sure that through my efforts or through my leadership, I am allowing the members of OOYOO to do what they want. So it's about having a company strong enough that the members can express OOYOO in its very, very primal form. And it doesn't need to be technology related. It just happens that it starts with technology.
Wow. That is so cool, man. I think that might be the first time that I've heard of something like that. Such a brilliant way to sort of structure a company, you know. I think you guys are creating like 1,000-year, maybe 10,000-year-old company.
Yeah,
that continuously, right, is influenced by the needs of society, the dynamics of the members, and then just continues to evolve. So I'm sure that, you know, the company, you know, has shaped you in a lot of ways as well, just as much as you have sort of led and grown this organization over the past couple of years. So, like, if you had to reflect on your like personal growth during this journey, like, what would you say were some of the key growth areas or things that you personally learned along the way?
So I think what helped me a lot is, so one of the things that I, let's say, sometimes don't get is like, oh, Ralph has a PhD or this person has a PhD. They must be super smart and they know everything.
I see.
And that kind of got into my head because, again, I was publishing papers in a very advanced field. I was working with big companies. And with that very narrow, like blinders, I wasn't forcing myself to rethink what I know and what I don't know. So I always assumed I know certain things. And if I don't know certain things, then I didn't want to be humble that I didn't know things. It's because that would have hurt my ego that, no, you know what? I know that. I know. Ask me everything about batteries or this. But what I found out, again, through this OOYOO experience and starting a company is, Ralph, you know what? You don't actually know anything. But that's fine. Through hardships about learning how to hire and fire, learning how to market, learning how to fundraise, learning how to do your business development, you're probably going to be wrong 90% of the time. But guess what? You're going to know slightly much more. So the fact that I am able to rethink and be confidently humble that I don't know anything is one of the, I don't know, has accelerated my growth, because I always approached someone who challenged my convention. Like, okay, I didn't know about that. Tell me more. And I would always be happy someone telling me I'm wrong, because if I indeed was wrong, then I'd be less wrong next time they corrected me, or I would have a conversation.
Wow. That just reminds me of the quote by, I think, Plato. All I know is I know nothing.
Yeah. That would be that would be a great way to put it. Again, just the confident humility. And one thing that has been, I noticed, and maybe because we're talking to a hopefully a younger crowd, is maybe it has something to do with social media. I mean, we could have a discourse here. It's because that, for example, on LinkedIn or social media, you always see the good stuff, right? So you always reinforce that my identity is, if I was, let's say, or for my case, if I was on the cover of Vanity Fair, then I must be this kind of that, because that's, you're always forced to push an identity or push something, right? But I think maybe that's also one of the reasons that I'm not on social media. The only reason that I'm in social media is I'm trying to, again, try to, let's say, craft a plan, and maybe that will lead to my call to action later, that, again, OOYOO is looking for creative people who are on this mission. So that's the only reason I'm trying to keep my LinkedIn partially alive, that when I make a post, I hope it spreads to something.
Nice. I love that. I think one thing that what you just mentioned about knowing and not knowing reminds me a lot about, I'm going to share another quote, so forgive me, but it's the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And I think that's really, I try and remind myself a lot as well, that I don't know so much. And it's really humbling when someone asks you a question to say, honestly, I have no idea. And that is that builds so much a stronger rapport than just trying to make something up and pretend like you know. So I love that realization, and it's obviously an extremely humbling realization as well.
100%.
And then maybe because there's some bad and again, I don't know the roots, but I've always been interested why not knowing is sometimes associated to incompetence. Yeah. It's okay not to know stuff. Again, now, but I remember when I was defending my thesis or I was attending conferences in which I was invited as an expert, and then there was a question that at that point, to be honest, I didn't know. I had hints, but even at that point, like, oh, you were an invited speaker, you're a PhD, you're supposed to be an expert in the topic, you should know. So I always ended up blabbing some stuff just to like, yeah, I like my attendance here is warranted. So so I was just curious, guys, like, what's your thought on this? Like, why is I don't know, not a common response, right?
Yeah, sometimes it's really all about being humble and saying, I don't know, I'll do my research and I'll get back to you. That should really be the norm that we should all really be striving for, I think. But thank you for sharing that, Ralph. I mean, oh, Robin, did you want to say something?
No, I just think also you can tell when someone doesn't know something. So I think it just works better for all parties. If I'm like, honestly, I don't know, let me check and get back to you. I think it just works for everyone. But yeah,
exactly.
It's a great question.
Exactly. So, all right. Well, I mean, man, I feel like there's a lot more I want to dive in here, but I definitely did want to take this opportunity to ask some advice for a lot of our younger, possibly even One Young World members, ambassadors who are listening in. So, all three of us are One Young World ambassadors. We've been to the summit. And I was wondering, for a young professional, this person might be an entrepreneur or maybe an entrepreneur, right? Somebody who's thinking of starting something or taking a big risk to make an impact. From your experience that you've gained thus far, what sort of like advice or tips would you share with them?
So one, just to stay coherent with the rethinking or the confident humility, I have learned immensely by having great mentors. And again, mentors not just in a specific aspect of business, but mentors in life. And it started with my dad, where he would give advice from his point of view. But looking back at time, I was not able to question his decisions because maybe I lacked the framework, or I was not rethinking. I was just accepting whatever his advice was. So that did not allow for discourse and more rethinking. But the key, again, one of the things that accelerated my let's say consciousness of myself and my limitations is the people that are around me now, or that I've put around me. They challenge me every day. Like for example, I want to, let's say I've been tasked of creating a business with this chemical company, and I wanted to do it this way because I thought this way. And then they would just challenge you. Why are you doing it that way? Why not this way? And then I'm forced to rethink the gaps in my knowledge. Why didn't I think about it anyway? And then, so basically a challenge network, let's say a great challenge network becomes a very good mentor network. And the characteristics that I found about a good challenge network is, again, at first, they should be giving you advice on things that they have already done. So at least that, again, you listen to their advice with more humility because, again, they've done this. But again, that doesn't stop you being able to discourse for your own rethinking. So they always challenge you. And next is they always, let's say the debate or the conflict is always on the task. It's never on the person. Like they're like, Ralph, you lack nothing, Ralph. Why are you doing this, Ralph? It's always on the task. It's always on your thinking is not correct. It's not you. Your thinking at this time is not correct, or your strategy is not correct. It's never about you, Ralph, because they have confidence in me that I can improve. So I will often have, heated discussions about things and strategy. But every after board meeting, we will always go to a nomikai and act like conflict finished, right? Yep. For me, it's the mentors. It's the mentors. One Young World has been amazing with this. They connected me to a lot of mentors, not just on the technology side, but on the business side. And I think you will develop, and it's not just all, and it's not just a specific kind of mentor, right? Because at one point, I was also falling into a trap where I would only listen to mentors that would have always supported me, or I would have liked their approach. They're like, hey, low is good, Ralph. You're on the right track. And it's hard. So it's almost like honey, and I was like like being trapped. But I always found that if you have a healthy balance of your extreme supporters, and then the people in your challenge network, you actually don't stay in the middle. You actually stay much ahead, because you bounce back. So you're like a unpolished rock, but if you bounce back too many times, then you end up being a gem or like a polished something. And I think One Young World, Japan, shout out to Darren and the team. I think you're orchestrating this very well, but I wish what other people, especially for the young ones, is that talk to that CEO. All right, talk to that CTO, talk to that founder. Even though you're 14, you're 13, you're 18, get them on your network. Because if they really see the genuine interest, they would always say yes. I've never seen a mentor turn me down. But again, explaining why I wanted it with such enthusiasm and humility that I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. Now I think that's something really cool to have if we'll basically accelerate all factors of your life, because how you deal with business, how you deal with your own emotions, how you deal with finance, just becomes makes you well-rounded, because they've made the same mistakes that you will be making in the past. So it's like shortcutting or doubling down on the lessons. Like, Ralph, I know, Ralph, you're gonna make this mistake, but please know that when you make this, call me. and then we're gonna talk about it.
Awesome. I love that. So just to pick up a few points is find great mentors. Also surround yourself by people who will challenge you, right? And not out of hate. They do it because they care about you. They ask you questions. I think those relationships are so valuable as well. And finally, even if you're 18 or 19 or 20, whatever it is, reach out to the CEO, reach out to the CTO. Just see, in most cases, they'll be happy to help. So I fully agree with those points, Ralph.
Exactly.
Awesome. Now, Ralph, I feel like we could talk for about another 3 hours, but I'm also wary our time is coming to an end. Looking forward, you've had this remarkable journey so far, from rubbing batteries at the age of 4 to doing what you're doing now. It's an incredible story. But what's next for you on the horizon?
So I think for us, for OOYOO, we're in our last year for this, let's say, our involvement for the Japanese government. So we're on the last stage, let's say, for the technical development. But after that, activities that relate to marketing, business, human resources, and administration will commence. So we're still in this company building phase, where the core technology has been demonstrated. There are activities that protect the intellectual property. Partners are being built up. But again, if we're doing a gargantuan task of first trying to provide a carbon capture solution. And next is trying to live by the OOYOO virtue of we can be what we want to be. Then those tall order tasks need people. And we need people who first align with the vision that we want to do for OOYOO, and to have that immense capacity to learn. So one fact about the company that I'm really proud, and then I hope again through this call to action I speak to a wider range. The company, again, we're 20 people, but our age portfolio is from 25 to 72 years old.
Wow. That's a very diverse, in terms of age,
yeah,
very diverse.
And let's say, and even our most senior member, every time we look at a problem that he hasn't solved, he's always rethinking. So if there's anyone out there, again, OOYOO is looking to move at an accelerated pace. We're trying to prepare the company for a growth phase. So if someone is interested, then I think, let's say a link of the website will probably be posted somewhere, but it's very easy to find anyway. OOYOO it's like 2 letters and it's very symmetric. So
people, if they want to find out more about your work, about OOYOO, they can look up ooyoo.co.jp.
Yep, or through LinkedIn.
Is there anywhere else where they can find?
Or LinkedIn. So I think that's a bit more selfish or related to what we're trying to do. But if you were just a listener who was looking to find some advice or find some laughter in your trip back home from work, is that, Robin basically summarized it, right? Find a challenge network, find mentors. And basically, we might try to, again, through this conversation, we hope that you find points where you can tangent. But ultimately, the change that you're looking to start is from within you. So basically, do what you want to do. You have that authority. I think a lot of people underestimate how much control they have in their feelings, in their emotions and expression. You have that authority to be whoever you want, be the change that you want.
Wow. Couldn't have asked for a better finish for this
exactly,
podcast.
Seriously.
Ralph, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, for sharing your story, your also vulnerabilities, things that you've learned. I think it's been an incredibly rich discussion. And as I mentioned before, I think you're extremely talented at sharing both stories, but also breaking down really complicated things into information that we can understand and find as compelling stories. So thank you so much. And I personally learned a lot about, for example, the value of mentors. I really liked what you said about OOYOO being a place where people can bring themselves, right? To just really be their original selves in your company. So I learned so much, and thank you so much for your time. What about you, Yoshi? What were your main takeaways from this conversation?
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, I think especially the part where you talked about the importance of being humble, that really resonated with me as well, because I do have an experience with entrepreneurship as well, and especially my first time around, like, oh man, like I also thought I knew everything, I was like, I got this, I went to these schools, blah blah blah, and I didn't know nothing. Like, wow, it was such a humbling experience. So the importance of really unlearning what you think you know, and then like relearning everything that you have to know with the help, advice from your advisors, mentors, teammates, customers, is such an important journey. And that's something every entrepreneur should definitely keep in mind. So thank you for sort of reminding us of that very, very important lesson, Ralph. Like, that's super, super essential. But okay, well, any final words from you, Ralph? Anything you want to sort of leave our listeners with before we conclude?
Yep, subscribe to this podcast.
Okay.
For more conversations like this,
all right, everyone.
Subscribe to the podcast. All right, thank you again, gentlemen, for this engaging conversation. Thank you very much.
Great. All right. Well, to all of our listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and also subscribe to OOYOO as well. Rate and share this podcast. We'll be back with more stories of impact soon. The power to create change is in your hands. So keep leading the way, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Let's keep brewing change one cup of coffee at a time. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Rolf.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone.